mental health and marriage. Those two things come together and you've got material for a firestorm. I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me in this program. That's where we're going today. Those of you who regularly see what we put up here will know that we talk about relationships, and we've talked about mental health many times. Today we are bringing those two together in a conversation with two very special guests, Jon and Jon Seidl. Jon has spent over a decade in digital media. He's the founder and president of the Veritas Creative. He served as managing editor of Kirk Cameron's The Courage, overseeing content on faith, family, and culture. Before that, he was editor-in-chief of I Am Second. Some of you may remember some of those powerful stories about real-life people and their transformation as followers of Jesus. Well, Brett is an interior designer. They, as you've guessed, are married. And the way mental health impacted their life is very powerful. But just as powerful is how they have formed a team in taking the challenges that, well, are just real life to them and making a life that is more than beautiful, but a life that brings goodness to others as well. And we talk about God in the middle of all of this, strong people of faith, Jon and Brett are. I think you will love this conversation with Jon and Jon Seidl. Well, Jon, Brett, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you on our program today. Thank you for being here and being willing to dive into some tough topics that I know are affecting others. It's just great to have you here.
Yeah, we are so excited to be here. Thank you for having us, and man, I'm sure we'll go behind the curtain in a new, fresh way, because mostly it's just me doing these, and so this is the first time that Brett gets to do it with me, and now maybe I'm a little scared.
To see what I say. No, yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to talk about this.
Well, people who regularly listen to this podcast know we talk a lot about relationships, and we have many times talked about mental health. And what we're going to do today is talk about both of those two together. So maybe the place to start, Jon, you have a story, and you share that in your book. Brett, it's your story too. But Jon, just let me give you a chance just to kind of, how did you start worrying, thinking, living, talking about these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, I always knew there was something a little different about me. Couldn't really put my finger on it. I think I would probably have described it as I was just a little bit more high strung or tightly wound, I guess would be the other term. There were things I couldn't stop thinking about, right? Just endless thought cycles that I would get stuck in, just a constant feeling of anxiety, really. Yeah. And but again, I just thought that's the way I was, and so I just kind of grin and bared it, if you will. Went through high school, went to college. I'm a small town boy from Wisconsin that went off to the big city in New York City for college, which having undiagnosed anxiety and OCD really brings it out.
That'll stress anybody out, let alone somebody with those things. Yeah,
exactly. While in college, I met a beautiful woman named Brett, and we started dating. And I think marriage has a way of exposing your blind spots. And so, we were a few years into our marriage, and it was really tough. It was really tough. And Brett can share more about this, but I think the term that she uses is she always felt like she was walking on eggshells, not knowing what would put me into one of those endless thought cycles. And so it really kind of came to a head about 2014-ish. So we had been married about 5 years. And Brett and I were going to walk downtown. We were living in downtown Dallas. We were going to kind of explore the city. And there was a cool coffee shop below us. And So I said, hey, babe, why don't you grab the coffee? I'm going to run to the bathroom and remember, no Splenda in the coffee, right? Yeah, I got it. And so I walk away, I come back, she hands me my coffee, I take a drink, and I just like almost do one of those spit takes, like Charlie Chaplin or something. And I just got angry. I got upset. I got confused. I got like, why would this happen over the wrong sweetener in my coffee? Now, Brett tells the story a little bit differently. She says I made quite the scene. I don't remember it that way, but you should probably go with her. And that ruined our weekend. And so towards the end of the weekend, she's broken down in front of me, just saying like, I'm not going anywhere, but I can't live like this, and you need to get help. And when you see the person you love broken down in front of you in that way, you say yes to a lot of things, right? So I said, okay. So I scheduled the first psychiatry appointment that I could get into, which was 2 weeks away. Which, by the way, if you want to figure out if you have anxiety and OCD, just have to wait 2 weeks before you can actually get diagnosed, right? And so I walked into the psychiatrist, and pretty early on, he said, Mr. Seidl, you have what's called GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And I'll tell you what, Carol, like that moment was actually one of the most freeing of my life, because before that, it was like the lights were off. I was punching in the dark. I didn't know what I was facing. When I got that diagnosis, the lights came on. I knew exactly what I was up against, and then we could make a plan to fight against it. So that's really the origin, my origin story. And so many things made sense then, right? The struggles that we were having in our marriage and our relationship, it helped me, but it also helped Brett, because not only did I know what I was facing, but she knew then what she was facing. So that's really the start.
Yeah. Thanks, Jon. And it just, everybody's honored when you are real like that. But for you, Brett, walking on eggshells, Jon, it says you described that experience for you that way. What was it like walking on eggshells those first few years of marriage?
Yeah, right before you get married, you're living kind of in la la land, right? I mean, roses and butterflies and rainbows. We had actually done long distance for 2 years prior to, up into 3 weeks before we got married. So the fact that we were just in the same zip code as each other, I mean, we were thrilled. And we got married, and quite quickly, a lot of those butterflies and rainbows started to dissipate. And what I started to notice was, as a young 21 something, was this, it started out as just, man, we can't communicate. Yeah. And then it started, and I thought, okay, my parents are marriage counselors. And so I kind of knew that maybe we just need to figure out the communication. That's not odd. And then over the next few years, it kind of just, it built and built and built to where I would say something completely innocent with no malintent, malintent wasn't even on the same block, right? Yeah. And it would just, in an instant, I called it the other Jon would kind of show up. And it so often left me just completely confused. I internalized it, because I thought I was trying to be a really good wife and be, the good submissive Christian wife and do all the things. And so I was internalizing. I'm like, man, okay, I'm not doing enough. I'm not saying the right things. I'm messing up. And so over time, that took a huge toll on my confidence. And I had never struggled with identity or confidence issues before. So it really, over the years, started to grind those down, kind of up into the story and the point where Jon was talking about, where we were in Dallas. And also early in your marriage, when you start to notice things happening, like you don't really want to rock the boat because you're still learning a lot about each other. And so who wants to go to their spouse and say, I think there's something wrong with you, right? I mean, nobody wants to hear that, and nobody wants to say that. And so it kind of left me between a rock and a hard place of like, something is wrong. I just don't know what it is, but like, I'm dying inside here. I am like, not the person I used to be. And I recognized that. And so this day that was supposed to be this awesome, fun day, you know, we had hard jobs. And so our weekends were like our time.
Yeah.
And kind of as he alluded, like our stories are very different. And that's something that I've also come to learn, especially even in the book, is the way he sees reality when he's in kind of those episodes is not how I see reality. We see things very differently because he is in the mode of anxiety, and that has taken over his mind and his body.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times he doesn't see things as they are. For example, that episode, right? He was flooded with anxiety when he realized I put the wrong sweetener. Again, seeming like no malintent there at all. I don't even remember if I did it, like didn't even realize I was doing it right.
Yeah.
And he exploded out of nowhere. And I remember my side of the story, because he had left, were people coming up to me asking if I was safe, if I was okay. And I was humiliated.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was the point to where I recognize, for whatever reason, that's when I recognized like something has to change. I can't not say anything anymore. I was mortified. And so that's kind of at the end of his story, kind of where I broke down in front of him and approached it and tried to have like something, we're in this together. That's a non-negotiable. Like, I'm here to stay, and making sure that I reinforce that, right? I'm here to stay, but we need to figure something out. Like, this isn't sustainable. So it was hard.
Yes. And thanks for being honest about that. And you're communicating to Jon, I'm here to stay. Wow, how generous and loving and important. And then Jon talked about getting the diagnosis. Brett, what was it like for you when there were words to the issues there, and now Jon had a diagnosis? What was that like for you to hear that?
Oh, relief is an understatement. I don't know if there's a really good word to describe it, other than kind of relief, enlightenment. Like Jon said, it was like a light came on, and it made me feel it like flooded me with compassion for him, that all this time I thought he was like, well, maybe I just married someone who's like really naturally angry and he has anger issues, or, you know, overworked and doesn't know how to process it. And I'm thinking it's like a character thing, right? And I was having those conversations in my mind of like, I married somebody whose character I didn't actually know, apparently.
Yeah.
And so when I heard that, like, no, this is a mental like disease. This has nothing to do with any of that in his character. This is still the Jon that I married and I love and that I know. This is something totally different, that we can tackle together. And it also helped me be able to not internalize his reactions, that they are not reactions geared and towards me. They are reactions because something is misfiring in his brain. It has nothing to do with me. And so that really lifted a burden that I had been carrying for a long time.
Good. Yeah. In your book, Finding Rest, you guys talk about AM and BM. And somebody explain what you mean by that and what the difference is.
Yeah, BM is before medication and AM is after medication.
Okay.
And so I quickly got on medication. My psychiatrist diagnosed it, and Brett probably I found relief, but Brett found relief as well once I started taking that.
Yeah. Talk, either of you, about how faith played into this. You write about the struggle to internalize where God plays in the middle of all of this, especially against some of the Christian messages, perhaps well-intentioned, that you do things right, you pray right, you have the faith, and everything's going to be okay. And so if something's not okay, that means you're not doing something right. I think beautifully, you spend a lot of time unpacking that. And I'd love to hear about that. First of all, in your own heart, and then how, how did that play together in your relationship with God as a couple?
Yeah, so going off the medication conversation, that's a great follow-up, because it growing up, I was part of a denomination and a faith tradition that said, if you just pray enough, if you just have enough faith, if you repent of the unknown sins that you might have committed, then everything's going to go well. And so that also meant, right, that like taking medication for your mental health was frowned upon, right? Because that was seen as in a sense, a worldly crutch, right? Or that lack of faith manifested in your life. And so that even led to some really hard conversations with my family once I, AM after medication, where they didn't go so well initially, where I was talking about that. And so that actually forced me into my faith even more, right? Because I knew there was something wrong about that thinking, and not really correct theology there, but I was forced to really dig into why. Right. And so for me, that's where I found what I call the most important book of the Bible, where I really dug into the book of Job, and how, when you look at Job, when you look at that story, it's very evident that God allows struggles in our lives to refine us and to redefine us and to bring us closer to him. Right. And that's echoed by Paul, who talks about the thorn in his flesh. Right. And he says, it's to keep me from being conceited, and that in my weakness he is strong. And it's almost like a New Testament version of Job, right? And so I think that mentality, and it's what I call a proper theology of suffering in the book, has helped us not just with the mental health aspect, right? But it's helped us in aspects with our children, right? Our marriage, when things aren't going perfect, right? Well, what is God trying to do here, right? What is he going to use this for? So I think our faith has become even stronger. I mean, listen, we're kind of coming out, or I would say maybe in a little bit of a difficult season with our businesses, right? As the economy is kind of struggling. And so we're forced to rethink some things. And Brett said this the other day. She goes, I really think that we are more of a team now than we ever were. And that's born out of the struggle and the hard times. Wouldn't you say, Brett?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, to your initial question, I don't know how to talk about our relationship, mental health, without talking about faith. It's so ingrained in all of it, because it is the foundation for what has gotten us through, and the foundation for how we see it, right? What got me through those early years, kind of the BM time, was, I struggled with the identity, but ultimately my identity was with Christ as a child of God first, not as John's wife first. Yeah. Knowing that and living in that truth got me through some really hard times of feeling that my identity was as a wife when it wasn't. And I think, just as kind of Jon said of the thorn in the flesh, and for mental health and in our relationship, I think both of us see that equally, right? It's a thorn in our flesh, in our relationship. It is not easy. And we don't hide that fact. It's an ongoing battle that we both deal with, him as the sufferer and me as the spouse and the supporter, but a sufferer in a different form, right? It affects us both because we are a team. Yes. And so I think once we accepted the fact that, okay, this is probably here to stay. Now we can lament, we can pray to God regularly, Lord, take this away, please. We will jump for joy if you take this away. But accepting that if he doesn't, that's okay too. And that the Lord uses the darkest times to bring forth some of the most beautiful redemptive aspects of our marriage, of our faith, of things around us. And so faith is integrated in every part of it.
Yeah. I'm glad, Brett, you are alluding to the fact that things just didn't magically get better. Jon, you got the diagnosis, you got on medication, and okay, now you know what you're dealing with, and your faith is strong, and you're a team, so everything's beautiful, right? Yeah.
Let me talk about this past weekend. And that's not a joke, right? So, listen, I still struggle right now. Listen, it's way better than it was 5 years ago, but it's not as good as it's going to be 5 years down the road, right? There are ebbs and flows. Sometimes it feels like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And so, for example, Brett was out of town this past week at a work conference, and that meant I had our 2 kids by myself, 7 and 5. And by Friday, when we went to pick her up from the airport, I was just absolutely exhausted, right? They had been good up until the point where I gave Brett the report that said, man, the kids have been really good this week, right? And then I jinxed it, right? And so we're going to pick her up from the airport, and the kids are just fighting and bickering in the back. I'm trying to think about certain things that we have coming up for work, because we also have the pleasure of being in business together, which is another aspect that we could talk about. Yeah. And so, she asked me a pretty innocuous question about just a meeting I had, and the response I gave her an answer, and her response was not what my flesh wanted to hear, right? It was kind of digging in and questioning, but not really questioning. And so I just shut down, right? I'm just like, oh, I don't want to have this conversation, And so I think those type of things still happen. Now, what's great is, whereas that would have been maybe a week-long thing, in BM, right? Now that's, 24 hours or 36 hours where I just need to recharge and regroup, right? And so it still affects us, but by the grace of God, not in the same way.
Yeah. The teamwork that you both have described, I just got a comment on that too. The scientific part of me is aware of research in several domains of life that people who go through hard things together can come through that more bonded, closer together. And I see that with us and God, like Job and God. Would Job have ever had the same kinds of questions about God after the events that are recorded in Job? He had been through stuff with God, and that changes you. And I see that with other people too. And the same thing in marriage, that when you successfully pursue through the hard times, your connection, your bonding, your relationship is stronger, more resilient, even more connected. And I'm aware of research on relationships that proves that. And it's great to hear you guys talk about that. And I'd just like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, while we both feel right now we're stronger than ever as a team, the caveat of that is like that it doesn't come easy. It comes with daily dying to self. I'm an Enneagram 8, which basically means I have a strong personality. I like to be in control, and I am perfectly okay with conflict. I will enter into it, word vomit, clean it up, and I'm good for the day, right? That's me. And so that is the polar opposite of Jon. And there is the need to daily die to myself and humble myself and see him for him and the strengths that he has. And so the teamwork that we currently have and hope to continue and strengthen is through a lot of intentionality every single day. I have to choose to be on his team instead of be against him.
I love that.
And for me, I tend to retreat, right? So where Brett wants to press into conflict, right? When conflict happens, I tend to retreat, right? I'm an Enneagram 3, right? And so I am constantly wanting to think about it or not want to deal with it, right? or I'm content at the end of the day to just like watch something mindless, do something that like gives me calm and peace. And that's also in a result of my anxiety, right? My mind tends to go a million miles an hour. And so when I have downtime, I just want to be. I just want to be, right? And Brett, so that dying to self for me looks like, no, I got to give more, right? I mean, even just last week, we were, the kids we're getting kind of restless, and Brett's like, hey, can we take him on a scooter ride? And I immediately was like, yes. Right. And it was an opportunity for me to give a yes to, whereas I'm like, I mean, I could just kind of sit home and we could maybe watch a show, or, it's like, no. So that's like investing in our family and our relationship the dying to self is present in both of us, but it looks different.
Yeah. Most of the married people who contact me say something like, if my spouse would only do something different, then we'd be fine. And I hear you guys both talking about, this is what I need to invest. It's not that you say I do and the rest of marriage and life and family just happens. It takes ongoing investment, ongoingly giving of yourself. And I hear you both subtext also that in part you are taking care of yourself so that you have something to give. That this isn't, harming yourself so that the other person gets goodness, although there may be moments of that the goodness you take in for yourself is in a significant part so that you have something to invest in this relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we both encourage each other, right, to have hobbies, to have friends that aren't just like quote unquote couple friends. You know what I mean? We joke that we date couples, right? Just to see, okay, can we be good couple friends? And that's awesome, right? You want that. But there are also times where it's like, listen, she needs a girls' night. I need a guys' night. I need to go to a football game, right? She needs to go, for example, to a conference. That was very life-giving for her. But I want to back up too and say this, when it comes to conflict, I think one of the best pieces of advice that there's two pieces of advice that we got that I think are just incredible. The first one is, you don't have to agree on everything, and we have to remind ourselves of that a lot, because even though she's an 8 and I'm a 3, we both want to be right, and there's so many times where we may have a disagreement and we find ourselves both trying to just convince each other of our point of view, when guess what? Both points of view can be right. You don't have to convince everyone. And so when we release that, that's so helpful. And the second thing, and Brett, I'd love to hear your comment on this, but is like, own 100% of your 2%. Meaning, so if I'm 98%, or excuse me, if Brett's 98 percent in the right, and I'm 2% in the right, so that means I'm 98% wrong. Brett may say, okay, listen, I get that. You know what? You're right on that aspect. Or the same for me, right? You know what, babe? Yeah, I need to own that. Even though in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so right there, right? It's like, no. What can I own? Own 100% of your 2%.
Yeah. And the tit for tat game,
yes,
is something that we have to both be aware of, that we're not playing that game, right? Well, you're more wrong in this situation. You have more to own up to in this argument. You were the one that started it. You, right? We have to make sure that we're not doing it. And I'm with my strong personality, I want to be the one to point out, like, hey, bro, like, this was all you. I just sat in the passenger seat, but like, this was like, no, I can't do that. And just like Jon said, you have to own up to whatever teeny tiny, potentially little portion that you had, right? So maybe, I have said things, many things in the past, and I tend to also come off very blunt, even though I don't mean to a lot of times, right? But there are many times in the past where I have said something and it will have sent him into an anxiety episode. And you know what? Even though I may have said something without meaning to say it wrong or hurtful, I still need to own up to, like, I am so sorry for the tone in my voice there. I completely see how you would have responded to that and read that. I need to adjust that. Will you forgive me? Rather than going into it of like, I can't believe you took that the way I mean, there's so many other angles. And so not doing this tit for tat, not doing the like, well, you were more wrong. And also there was, going back to your original question of kind of taking care of ourselves. This is something that is important to me. And so much so that after the first time I read Jon's book, I'm like, babe, this is fantastic, but you need to add in an entire chapter here. And it was the chapter on the loved ones and the spouses.
Yes.
And I said, we need somewhere to go. We need to help to understand what you're going through. I also, as the spouse, something that I needed to learn is when it comes to mental health, so much of the focus is on the sufferer, as it should be, right? They're going through a lot. But as the spouse and the loved one, I had to learn that it is okay for me to seek help. And not only okay, but it is necessary. I need to see a counselor because I need to work through my thoughts and my feelings on how this is affecting me and how I can support him and how I can communicate properly. And so making sure that I find that time just to help me learn just as much as he's working on himself and going to counseling and taking medication, I need to do the same as well. And continuing to learn what the mental health does to him, right? I've talked to a lot of other wives and husbands who are the supporter. And one thing that is really humbling to me when they're like, I don't know if I can be married to somebody who has these disorders. And I say to them, first of all, put yourself in their shoes, right? So I'm a control person, right? Can you imagine having a mental disorder to where your body and your mind has reactions that you can't control? Like that would feel debilitating and like I'm in a jail cell, right? Can you imagine what they're going through? I'm pretty sure I would rather have my shoes than be in their shoes, right? So as hard as it is on us as the spouse, as the supporter, put yourself in their mental space and what they're battling through. And so that has been something that I have had to learn along the way.
And let me just say this, by the way.
Yeah.
Is that, Brett said some stuff here about like, putting herself in my shoes. Earlier, she talked about the idea of like not internalizing things, understanding that it's a disorder. But I want to be clear that that doesn't excuse certain things I've said, actions I've taken, the withdrawal at times. Like both, they say that the true mark of wisdom is being able to hold two truths at the same time that are both true, right? So it can be true that she has learned not to internalize, or when there is an episode, to give me more grace. But by the way, that doesn't mean that I have carte blanche to say whatever I want, to shut her out, for days on end, and like all that stuff, right? Like there's still stuff I have to work on. Again, own 100% of my whatever percentage, right? So I just want to be clear that I love having Brett in this capacity and saying this stuff, but I also don't want the mental health sufferer to go and say, well, I listened to this podcast with this married couple, and by the way, I have a mental health issue, so you just have to do everything for me and just forgive everything. I mean, you do have to forgive, right? But you can't call out anything in me. That's not the case.
That's really good, both of you. That's really, really good. One final area I want us to get into. You both care a great deal about how the body of Christ has done less well than it could have in helping individuals and families affected by mental illness. And I'd just like to give both of you, a little space to talk about where can we do better what kind of input would you suggest to those in the body of Christ, either as individuals or if there are any in a position of influence or leadership? What does that look like?
So for me, there's a few things I would say. The first is recognize that it is more prevalent than you realize, right? And so in doing the research for my book and workbook, I love Charles Spurgeon, right? He was called the Prince of Preachers. And as I dug into more of him, I found out that Charles Spurgeon had depression, right? Like he would counsel young pastors on melancholy, right? That's what he called it. So he and his wife together actually would even counsel young preachers on how to deal with that. So if Charles Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, can have this, guess what? Bob in the back pew can have it too, right? Yeah. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing would be, yes, point us upward and outward, right? So yes, point us to Jesus, right? We know, even though I've talked about, and Brett has talked about the fact that this is a chemical imbalance and there's physical things at play, that doesn't mean I'm devoid of spiritual issues related to this, right? And so I tell people like, and this is where Brett and I can tend to butt heads, especially is my sinful issue that I need to root out is pride and control as well, right? My anxiety wants to control everything. It wants to, I talk about the tyranny of the what if in the book. It wants to figure out and solve all those what if questions. That doesn't really leave a lot of room for faith, right?
Yeah.
So I know that there are spiritual issues that I need to work on, right? But now what I tell people is my medication, I take my medication because my anxiety at a normal level every day without it is at an 8. Well, if my anxiety is an 8, peaking into the 10s and above, I'm never able to have those spiritual conversations. I'm never able to do that heart work that I need to do. On my medication, it brings it down to a 4. And at a 4, guess what? Brett and I can have a lot healthier and calmer conversations, right?
Good.
There's a lot more logic and reason, and then the spiritual work can begin. And so yes, point us upward for those internal spiritual issues, but don't be afraid to point us outward to doctors, to Christian counselors, to psychiatrists, to people who know how to handle this or have experienced it as well.
That's good. Brett, do you have anything you'd want to say in that arena?
I think I echo and agree with everything that Jon said, and kind of just want to add in, especially as a female, in the spouse of someone who suffers from this. I have sought Christian counseling for this early on, and I was told to pray harder, to be a better and more submissive wife, and I kind of just needed to deal with it, right? And that was not helpful. There was no aspect of, well, maybe there is something going on in his brain, maybe there is deeper issues, there was nothing helpful there. And so by putting that submissive wife stamp on, that I think a lot of us Christian female wives kind of, it's like the easy blanket statement for us when we're seeking help, and that was not helpful at all. And so that is something that those people really need to dig in, ask good questions, also help me through how to take care of myself, pray through scripture with me. That would have been so helpful and so easy to do, right? So
that's good. Well, Jon, you've written a couple books. We've alluded to them. You wrote Finding Rest, I believe, last year, and then just as we're recording this, just a few weeks ago, released the workbook accompanying that. Just like to give you a minute to talk about what's in those and invite people to connect with those resources.
Yeah, so really had the honor of writing this book as someone who has experienced this, right? I don't pretend to be a clinician, a pastor, a doctor, right? But it's really a conversation, hopefully between friends, of someone who can kind of understand and identify with what you are going through if you suffer from mental health, right? And so there's the book, and then there's the workbook, which really then kind of digs in and invites you to go deeper and to do some of that that really important work. But as Brett said, I think one of the things that I've seen how the grace of God and how God has used this work in our relationship together is that it isn't just for the sufferer. Brett talked about the chapter, Help Me Understand. That's also for spouses and loved ones of people, who love the people who love people like me, right? But also when I talk about that proper theology of suffering, what has been really encouraging is people who have come back and said, listen, I don't necessarily go through mental health issues, but I heard some great things about your book and I got it. And it's helped me through losing my job, right? Or it's helped me through a wayward child, right? It's helped me through periods where I just feel like I'm in the desert and the wilderness, because that proper theology of suffering in Job and Paul, that speaks to not just mental health, right? That speaks to all of our suffering, all of our issues, right? C.S. Lewis would talk about how that the number one atheist argument is the fact that there's pain and suffering in the world, right? So how do you handle that? How do you deal with it? That's really what the book is about, especially through a mental health lens, but also through other people. So if people want to pick up the book, the workbook, I have a course out on it as well. They can go to findrestnow.com, findrestnow.com, and that kind of works as the landing site for everything that they would need to know.
That's awesome. If you're watching this video, the link is under this video. If you're listening, the link is in the show notes. Jon, Brett, this has been such a rich conversation. We are blessed and honored. Thank you, and blessings on your relationship, your family, what God continues to do with and through you. This has been wonderful. Oh, friends, check the links under this video. We'll have the links there to Find Rest Now, to Brett's interior design site, and info about the books in particular. I believe you will really want to connect with all of that material. And maybe Jon and Brett, personally, you'll find links there to social media and all kinds of stuff. The Finding Rest, A Survivor's Guide to Navigating the Valleys of Anxiety, Faith, and Life, is where Jon unpacks his story of anxiety and OCD, mental health, walking through, as he described, a theology of suffering, and then Finding Rest Guiding Workbook, an invitation to go deeper. I think you will really love that. Also, we'll have links to 2 of our resources at Dr. Carroll Ministries, 2 courses, one on Defeat Your Fear and Anxiety, and another on Fully Alive Marriage. And both of those can help you go deeper in either of those areas with our material if you're interested. I would be delighted to hear from you. Leave a comment under this video. I read and interact with you personally there. And then if you need to get in touch with me confidentially, you can use the contact page on our website, drcarrollministries.com. Leave a contact or leave a message there, and it comes directly to me confidentially. And if I can help at all, I respond personally. Thank you so much for being with me on this program. And until next time, may God bless you.